Hey everyone, welcome back to Politic and Girly, where we chat all things politics and economics and everything in between. With that being said, let's get into the video. I ended my last video, the coup, on our finances, freedom and future, on what felt like an optimistic note. And at the time, it really did feel like an optimistic note. I still do maintain it is optimistic because we have a clear vision of what real growth in South Africa looks like. It is the growth that was promised, but we have been shamelessly denied of it, even with the GNU as a crutch. And to be real, by the looks of things, it doesn't seem too optimistic, especially when you bring in globalists and technocrats into the equation, or at least that's what they want you to think. This video might sound like another rant quipping on capitalism, but it's not. To me, it's full of hope because the future isn't bleak if we understand the game. And the game is this: an ideology became our system of reality. And we also told there is only one way it works: the American way. And there lies in like the whole mega problem that creates problems upon problems for the rest of the world. But that's a whole different video and a whole different discussion that we're not getting into in this video. And regarding this American way, there are whispers that the system needs a crisis or the system needs to collapse because too many people have taken the slice of the pie, and guess what? They still want more. So they need to spoil this existing pie and bake a new one preferably made with like the most expensive ingredients, filled with allergies, so only a select few can eat it. So the question remains, could the tools of change work? Yes. But globalists have made it seem impossible, at least while we keep giving them the power. How did an ideology become a system? Let's break it down. First, we're going to start with the definition of what is an ideology and what is a system. An ideology is a coherent system of ideas based on assumptions that may have no factual basis, while a system is an organized scheme, a method of how things are done. Think about the Portuguese and the island of Madeira. In my previous video, the core idea was very simple. We have exhausted our timber in Europe and, we've made enough enemies and now we are allies in some way or form with our neighboring countries, Your Majesty. There's treasure outside the continent. Surely there'll be more out there. That's the foundational idea. And to really, for that idea being intellectually developed, they went to Madeira. They found this island that was uninhabited. They were like, yay, timber, we have it for shipbuilding. It worked and it was free. And then they ran out. And then they realized, oh my gosh, this can be used for something else. And that was sugar. And they saw much success. And then it was like, let's rinse and repeat. That's them. But the reality was boom, bust, quit. And then, of course, it was then socially adopted, then it was mobilized, and finally we get to integration, where it becomes the way of doing things, where it's embedded in institutions, legal systems, and society, despite its glaring destructive shortcomings. Doesn't help that, as I said before in my previous video, the PR by millionaires and billionaires serves as an influence that you can aspire to. Never mind that most of them have gotten there through the same nefarious and destructive activities. Hello, Jeff Bezos. This isn't just history. This has become a blueprint for a lot of successful billionaires out there. And it's why I felt so bleak after my last video, because I left it on what felt like an optimistic note, but I still just did not feel right. I felt like, something is missing. I felt like something is missing. And that was until I came across an interview that kind of changed everything, brought what I would call a sparkle of hope that kind of ignited more or less. And I will link it in the description, or if not, I will leave the title of the interview in the description. Basically, this video is about how banks create money. And I don't mean the Reserve Bank. I mean your bank, your Standard Bank, your Net Bank, your Capitec Bank, etc. When they loan you money, that money does not come from someone else's savings or deposits. Legally, what banks do through accounting magic, they create it out of nothing. They create loans out of nothing. It's a little bit like a double entry on the spreadsheet where they say, here's a liability of the loan that we're giving you as a deposit. It's coming out of us, out of our institution. And then when you make payments, it becomes capital that they receive in payback. So you have these double entries of like them having money from somewhere, coming from somewhere, and you giving that money back via your payments. And then that's how it exists. Academically, this is called the credit creation theory of banking. This theory argues that each individual bank is not a financial intermediary that passes on deposits or reserves from the central bank in its lending, but instead creates the entire loan amount out of nothing. Nothing. And this is coming from the study called Can Banks Individually Create Money Out of Nothing, the study by Richard Wenner. And in this paper, he includes empirical evidence which really proves that banks indeed do, individual banks, small banks, not central banks, they indeed create money out of nothing. Does not come from your savings, does not come from your investments, does not come from the reserves as per the what you call the money multiplier theory whatsoever, or it does not even come from the Reserve Bank. In 2025, it's easier for us to understand. I think it's easier for us to understand because banks don't, when you go and get a loan, they don't give you a suitcase full of cash. It's just a number that after all of that process, it appears on your account, and it's like how you would put a number on a calculator, like I said, it's like, oh, this is my balance, and this is where the hope comes in. If banks can create money out of nothing, then I guess the only question that matters is, why are they not doing it in a much more productive way to, help and work in the interest of the people? And this is where we come into the reality, I would say. Right now in South Africa, small businesses, the biggest job creators in South Africa, and I think essentially everywhere in the world, are going through hell. And in turn, many employees are too. They can't get loans to grow or even to hire people or even pay them livable salaries. Why? Because our banks are shackled to a globalist banking framework, the Basel III, which is created by unelected central bank governors, by the way, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision from G10 countries that was created in 1974. In 1974, they created Basel I, and then 3 is the one that came after the 2008 banking crisis. What this Basel III framework does is that it forces banks to only lend to safe bets, that is massive corporations, and not lend to what they consider risky, productive small businesses. And productive is what I put in there because they are actually adding to the production of the GDP, but hey. But instead they loan money to individuals, and there's nothing wrong with us getting loans. The problem is that they loan you money to supplement your salary that's already too low to begin with, or they loan you so that you can pay a mortgage, which the more people get a mortgage loan, the higher the assets are, which means less people get to afford this. And when you do afford it, the mortgage that you would be getting like 3 years later will be astronomical. Like it won't make sense, especially with the repayments. So it's just like they kind of creating this weird cycle of poverty where you kind of living on credit, you're living on loans to survive. No matter what they say, they've kind of designed the system to be in a way that you and economies in general, they fail and they create banking crisis. Anyway, it's a whole thing. But it doesn't have to be that way where we are stuck in a cycle of poverty that they create and our economies fail because of them. What if banks loan that magic created out of nothing money to viable small businesses. Those businesses could grow, they could hire people. That means we will see such a significant reduction of unemployment, and people will be paid actual livable salaries that do not have to be dependent on loans, that you'll be able to get a loan that you would pay in time in a healthy way, that if you want to pay it back fast, you're able to do that because you have a salary that allows you to take care of your needs and wants, have disposable income, and be able to make extra payments. The economy as well would grow in a way that is actually tangible, and that will be so evident in people's lives. We will see GDP growing. Instead of 1%, it will probably grow at like 15%, and we will see that 15% being evident in people's lives. And the truth is, we know this works. Japan did it post-war. They had a network of small banks funding small businesses, creating an economic miracle. And America didn't like that. And it was outside of their way of doing capitalism. So they collapsed it. And Japan had 20 years of recession. China applied a similar model. And mind you, they're not even using capitalism as the economic system. These smaller banks funded its productive sectors. And look at the explosive growth that China has, like growth that now America is terrified at. At least that's how it feels like. And you know what? I know someone will probably have like more or less of a similar thought that I did, because I was like, what if they sanction us? And what if they relegate us to a junk status? And to that I say, look at Russia. They were kicked out of the SWIFT banking system. They were sanctioned to oblivion. And what happened? They adapted. McDonald's left, and they just like put a Russian name there. Boom. Levi Strauss left, and there was like a Russian name. Boom. So it honestly was like an exchange of names. At least that's what it felt like when the war started and the sanctions started coming into Russia. And people, economists, and markets were expecting and anticipating the Russian economy to collapse, but it didn't. Life went on, and now Trump is kind of desperate to really work with Russia and really desperate to get this war out of the way, because there is something that Russia has that the global north needs. And that's what happens, is that if a government puts its people first, you can survive and even thrive outside of the system of the American way. And guess what? They will come back, and they will definitely put sanctions on you. We do know that. But they will come back and want to work with you, because there is something that each country needs. There's a reason why globalists want to become globalists, because as countries, we are interconnected in some way or form. So the point that I'm aiming to get across is that our Reserve Bank, as well as our local banks, could create money to pay off all of those IMF and World Bank debts tomorrow. Like poof, they will be gone. It's just numbers on a screen, we could be free of the crushing national debt that they use to force austerity on us. Our nation would be so prosperous in legit less than a year. But you know what? We will do things steady. In a year or even 2 years, the tools are right there. The power exists. We have evidence that it works. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. But alas, we have been bamboozled. Like the biggest of the bamboozling has been there. Like we live in a democracy where we don't even get to choose the people in power. We choose parties, and as a result, we get leaders with no backbone that can't stand up for what is right and stand up for the people. Politics isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's a science of possibilities. It's about looking at the options and choosing the one that gives the best outcome for your people. We have institutions that could work for us and not be independent from us. Banks have the power to transform our economy, and they don't need the 10 million starter capital to do that. This isn't a call for a crisis, it's a call for clarity. The system isn't broken. We do know that it's made and it's built in a way that it serves the select few. But now we know that There's a magic trick that works. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So, armed with this information, I believe that as a people, we can demand more, and not just as South Africans, honestly, everywhere. We can demand more, and we even have grounds to demand more. We have the Constitution backing us. We can mobilize. We can insist that our banks, our government, and our institutions work for the prosperity of South Africa and not for the select few South Africans, for the entirety of the South African people. And that is why I have this hope, because the biggest lie that they ever told was that we were powerless, even if we have the information. But you realize, no, we're not powerless at all. We just have to stop believing them and start baking our own pie our own way. And if they say otherwise, we take the same tools that they have, the same systems that they have, and you know what? You make your own stove, and then we make our own pie. Okay, thanks for watching the video, and I just want to know what are your thoughts on this video. Have you ever heard of the different theories of banking? If you do, let me know. And yeah, leave a comment below and let's start baking our own pie. See you on the next video.